Welcome to the Learning Can't Wait podcast, a Full Mind production. At Full Mind, our vision is to ensure every child has access to an exceptional education. Each episode, we will be joined by pathfinders within and around the education space who are bringing about transformational change on behalf of deserving students. I am your host, Hayley Spira-Bauer. Welcome back, everybody, to the Learning Can't Wait podcast. This podcast episode is a long time in the making. I'm excited to introduce you to an independent consultant and the chief troublemaker, Rob Schwartz. Rob, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Hayley. I feel like, longtime fan, first time caller, but to listen to the podcast and really enjoying it. So excited to be on.
That is great. We connected just about a year ago, and it became really obvious that we were really aligned on a lot of things, which doesn't necessarily make the best podcast guest because sometimes you want a little conflict. But what I like about your introduction, calling yourself a troublemaker, is I know we're going to rabble-rouse together here, and I'm excited to do that with you.
Yeah, 100%.
Rob, start us off by telling everyone how you came to be the personal and professional version of yourself.
Oof. So the flippant answer is LA traffic. If I expanded on that, it's naivete, stubbornness, and kind of a little obsessive compulsive to become competent at some things and great at things that I love and love, honestly. In 1994, I graduated college. I joined this upstart organization called Teach for America. It was the fourth core. Nobody knew exactly what we were getting ourselves into. I subsequently moved across the country from the East Coast to Los Angeles. Moved in. If you're going to do that, what do? You live by the beach with a bunch of guys, which is what I did before I ever got a job there. And then my job was in East LA, about 20 miles, which in LA is anywhere between 45 minutes and 2 hours. And it turned out to be kind of a blessing. I said naivete was part of it. When I started teaching in this school, which I found out 20 years later when Davis Guggenheim's Waiting for Superman came out, this middle school in East LA was one of the schools profiled as like the dropout factory, where all the quote unquote lucky families got into the KIPP school down the street. It was a 2,000 student middle school. And the naive person in me was like, well, I had a really strong science program in middle and high school and college. I'm going to teach the way I was taught, which was at a rigor that a lot of the students had never experienced before. But I didn't know any different. And I hadn't heard enough that, well, these kids can't do that level of work. But at the same time, I wasn't good enough as a teacher to get them to do that work yet. And this is where like the LA traffic came in, because there were two pieces to that. One, I had 45 minutes to 2 hours every afternoon driving home to reflect on what worked, what didn't work, why didn't it work, what can I do better? And this is kind of the obsessive part of my personality of like, I just have to get at least good at this. And the other thing that it did is it changed my patterns. I would wake up super early, I'd get to school super early to beat the traffic, and then I'd stay late to avoid traffic going home. And what that caused was, first, like, started creating friendships with all the people who are my age, who are 22, 23, which were the security team, the janitorial staff, the instructional assistants, who are all from the local community. And they kind of adopted me, and we would play basketball in the afternoons. We go out for drinks, we go to restaurants, and I learned about the community of East LA and what the hopes and dreams were for the people within it. And ultimately, like, this was the love part. I fell in love with this community and the people within it. And it just, and like when you love something or you love someone, you'll do anything for them. And this is where like the Gen X in me got kicked in. And it's like, okay, I'm just going to work tirelessly. And I spent 7 years at this school, and really honed and became at least a competent, if not like a really good teacher during those 7 years. Ultimately, like I got beat down by the system, I guess you can call it. It was a LA Unified School. Everything I tried to do that was like innovative and beyond the pale would get shut down. Um, and this was just at the beginning of the charter movement. So I found the only charter middle school that was about to launch in downtown Los Angeles, and I joined that organization. Um, and I'm like, I'm a great teacher. I'm going to come in. I'm going to be a great teacher there. And it was a very different community. I went from almost 100% Latinx community to 100% Black community. And everything that I was trying wasn't working. And honestly, by like Christmas, I'm like, I'm just going to finish out the school year. I'll find a new job for next fall. Um, but I had this like epiphany of like, oh, like I skipped a step. Like I didn't actually learn about this community. It's a different community. It's a different set of students, a different set of families. So once I started to do that and started to do all those things over again, engaging myself in the community, going to the basketball games, the soccer games, all the different plays and music performances, having dinner with people in the community, like then it's like, oh, then it started to click. The kids bought into what I was delivering, and I'm like, oh, 9 years later, I'm a teacher. I founded a high school as a principal there. I became chief academic officer of the network, and just kind of grew up through those two organizations to kind of be the person that I am now.
Wow, what a story. I didn't actually know that story, and it really resonates with me for a couple of reasons. One, when you go to your LinkedIn profile, which I mean, the center of the earth, LinkedIn, you say specifically that you build it says Robert Schwartz, building relationships that strengthen teams, sustain individuals, and achieve priorities. And like you kind of lead with your message here, which is that relationships are the center of whatever work we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. Like whether it's getting students to buy in. So we had this. One of my friends and former colleagues talks about the best middle school teachers are a combination of camp counselors and content experts. Because what the camp counselors do best is they form those relationships, not just like with the camper or student, but also amongst the campers and students. So that I always kind of took that with me. And it is like once a student understands that like you believe in them, that you love them, that you care about them, they then will do almost anything that you ask and achieve almost any bar that you can. And then it wasn't any different when I transitioned to a principal. If I got to know my teachers and they knew that I cared and they knew that I was investing in them and we could build a team together that all worked towards one outcome, then that's when the school is going to start to soar.
Not for nothing, someone asked me last night at an event what I miss most about being in a school. And it's the thing that you named, building a community where the kids care so much about each other. They become like rabid champions for one another, more so than I could even myself, the love that I myself could spread. They have 30x the love and care for one another and support. That is what I miss most about being
100%. Yeah, 100%.
Okay, so let's talk about school leadership.
Yeah.
You were a principal. You named just now that relationships were extremely important there. How did you learn to become a principal? Like what did you read, study? What degrees did you get? Talk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, I think I learned on the job. I was like fortunate enough. So I had a lot of experiences before that with adult leadership. So I was like the department chair at Stevenson Middle School when I started there, probably by my third or fourth year, and was able to like build a pretty cohesive science team, at that school. I became a dean. When we launched View Park Middle School, when I was a teacher, we were kind of on this island and we had to take leadership. So I just had like lots of experiences building towards that. and then seeing it modeled by other people that I really admired. But I didn't really start, I got my admin credential by taking a test. There's like a 6-hour test of like, do you know the administrative standards and can you apply them? It wasn't until later that I went to grad school for my doctorate where I could put language to some of the things that I was learning. But more it was like trial by fire, practicing in smaller doses, and then seeing what other people that I really admired were doing and try to replicate that with my own spin on it. I would say the other piece of things is I was actually really, the whole like waiting for Superman phenomenon where like principal is superpower, I think was damaging. I think what I recognized quickly as a principal is it's not a one-person job. So the way that I started talking about it was like, and I'm a little geeky, so like I would talk about it as like the Avengers and not Superman. And if you know about the Avengers, and I'm just going to go on a little bird walk at my geekiness here.
Let's go. I can't wait.
The Avengers are a group of superheroes that are actually united by a mortal. So the boss of the Avengers is Nick Fury. He's a human. He doesn't have supernatural abilities, except for the fact that he knows how to get all of these superheroes with honestly large egos and different agendas all working on the same page together towards this common good. And that, I think, is what the principle is: more Nick Fury and less Superman. And you need to surround yourself with A-quality people, which I think I was fortunate in being so early in the charter movement. Is like we had our pick of like, this is the best English person, and they can take leadership on these other things also. And here's this amazing math teacher who can also write strategic plans and do these other things. And we were able to put this team of Avengers together and really move things forward. So it's always been like how I've moved forward is like, it's not about like what I can do, it's about like what we can do. And I can just be the mortal behind the scenes that are helping to create the structures and systems and environment in order to like let them do their best work.
I love that level of humility. And it takes a really good leader to be able to find the right talent and retain the right talent, which I named for you just before we started recording that at the event I was at last night, I was listening to Siraj Purohit of OpenAI interview former U.S. Education Secretary Arne Duncan. And we spoke a little bit about this. We spoke about the current teacher shortage across the United States, but how important it is for great leaders to exist, because as with any job, if you have a bad boss, you leave your job. If you have a good boss, you stay at your job. So yes to being humble and saying that you assembled Avengers and they wouldn't have fought with you had you not been a good leader. So like, just want to acknowledge that undercurrent or that like unspoken comment here in this conversation.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And it's also some of it's survival. Like, and you can't do it by yourself for a long time. And I was a principal for 5 years, and I don't know if I could have done it. I definitely could not have done it for that long without this group of people. And I don't know that I could have done it much longer. I also had young kids at the time, so that's a whole dynamic. But I say all that to say is like, so I think we've gone through these phases. We went for the principal as superhero, as Superman, Superwoman. We started to move then, I'd say, like in the teens and leading up, where it's like, okay, now it's we're going to create these teams because we need to create this next generation. So we started as like, at least as a charter sector, being really intentional around, there's a principal, they have these assistant principals who have very defined roles. There's a group of instructional coaches and deans, and then we have teachers that take leadership. So we build this pathway, which took a lot off of the principal's plate to build it so they could create their own team of Avengers. And then the pandemic hit. And then principals took on the Superman role, Superwoman role again, because it's like, I can't tax the other adults in the building because they're just hanging on. And I don't know that we've course corrected back to more of the intentional team building and pipeline building. And the principal job became just like super hard. I mean, it's always been super hard, but it became like more isolated again because we felt like, probably rightly so, that we could not tax the adults any more than they were already being taxed.
Whew. Yeah, the pandemic really changed everything in education. I know so many spaces have been impacted, but fundamental kind of reorganization of our brains and also how we approach, but at the same time, so much didn't change.
Yeah.
That, like, I felt like, I mean, I know I'm not alone in this thinking, but the opportunity that presented itself after the initial crisis stage was over, we were still in crisis, but the initial stage of crisis was over, for folks to really innovate and transform their practices, their structures, their systems with an equity mindset first, came and went.
Yep. Yeah, it was a rubber band snapping right back to business as usual, because that facilitated survival.
Right.
But it wasn't, but you always just barely had your head above water. And there's very few systems that are thinking about what are the ways that we need to fundamentally change, because in those early days of, for lack of a better term, ed reform, how do we get student results? Well, we made the teachers work harder, and we made the coaches work harder. We made all the adults work harder. And then during the pandemic, we said, oh, we got to protect the teachers. And oftentimes that caused students to lose out.
Yeah.
Now, where I think the sector's starting to go, and we need to figure out ways to hasten this, is how do we create win-win situations for students and the adults that serve them?
Okay, so you have had the experience in your previous full-time role of seeing many, 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 many schools. Who is helping these schools and these leaders prepare to be exceptional? Tell me some bright spots.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. There are definitely organizations, school systems, support organizations, and others that are helping individual leaders and teams of leaders become exceptional. I would think that the table stakes, you can't be a great, this is my bias, you can't be a great school site leader without understanding what instructional excellence looks like, and how to support teachers and others to create instructional excellence in your classroom. So I think about some of the pioneers in this work. I don't know that there are people that even predate these folks, but the Teach Like a Champions, the relays, more probably, the newer, some of the newer organizations like Instruction Partners, like Teaching Lab, who are really helping leaders help teachers understand what instructional excellence looks like. So I think that's table stakes. To be honest, I don't know who's really out there to help people get the culture of an organization right. I think that there are leaders who instinctually can do that, but understanding like how you get the culture right and instruction right together, I think is a gap.
So what are we going to do about it?
Oh,
Rob,
you want me to
seem
come
like
with
you have
solutions?
some ideas.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Yeah, so I think the other move that I think has maybe started during the pandemic and has accelerated, it was a much needed move in the space, and you talked about it in terms of like equity, is like a lot of the leaders that are coming up in the space are leaders that are from the local communities that they serve. My biggest fear is that we are woefully underpreparing these folks and expecting miracles in ways that, when myself as a white leader coming into a Black community or Latinx community didn't have these same expectations on me, and that if this round fails of whatever this form of education 3.0 or whatever you want to call it, that we are going to say, well, didn't work hiring these leaders of colors from the local community. So I do think that there are organizations that are popping up now and are starting up that can have the distinct ability to support leaders of color. One organization I'm on the board of is the Diversity and Leadership Institute. They help deans, assistant principals get their admin credential with a very strong equity lens in preparing this next generation of leaders. And they have cohorts right now in Los Angeles and the Bay Area, in California, and hoping to continue to grow. I think that, to me, is a very hopeful place. They're also helping to create community amongst these leaders so that they don't feel like they're isolated and alone, even though they might be the only leader of color in their building or even within their district. They have other people that they could rely on, so we need more of that. I do think that a lot of these organizations that I named, the relays and the instruction partners, have done some deep work around how they can then better support leaders of color. And it's partially by they've hired people with that type of expertise in their organization and have been open to modifying the way they've done things. I do think we need more of that. And I'd say the other piece is, like, we need to keep more teachers of color in the classroom longer so that they can develop their own instructional expertise and eye. I don't know who's doing that yet, but I think part of the solution is that, like, we have to keep more teachers of color in the classroom longer and then show them what the pathway is if they want to take on additional responsibilities beyond a single classroom. I don't know if I gave you an actual answer there,
no,
Hayley.
but what I appreciate about that is how you have really touched on some both big obvious topics and some smaller ones. As you said, the quote ed reform movement has more leaders of color from communities they grew up in, serving their communities. I think a lot about well-intentioned ideas and efforts to have more teachers and leaders of color be in the communities they're in that aren't, like you said, equipping their leaders and teachers for the sustained challenges ahead of them, and the impact that ultimately has on children. And so I appreciate you calling that out and also naming where you see some bright spots happening in this work. I'm curious how you feel. I mean, I'm going to shift topics slightly, but it is related. I'm curious how you feel about the hype cycle of AI and how that impacts the work of leaders in schools today.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, like, that's on a lot of people's minds right now. So in my last role at Silicon Schools Fund, we were looking at the hype of AI and hearing from ed tech folks, hearing from other funders of, like, how this was going to be a game changer. And we kind of said, well, maybe, but a game changer for what? So what we did is we convened a group of educators in partnership with some great organizations, AI EDU, Transcend, and said, what do you think, what's a problem you're trying to solve in your classroom that AI might be able to support? And really, more than anything, it was like an AI literacy cohort of, like, helping teachers and school leaders learn about what AI might be able to do. And then us as funders be able to learn from what teachers need and what school building leaders need from AI. And I think, we came to the conclusion's a strong word, but we learned a lot. And one of the things that we learned was teachers and leaders just need time to play with it. There's tons of potential for it to make teaching more effective and more efficient at the same time. You have to identify the problem first that you're trying to solve and not say, this is a cool tool, I'm going to figure out a way to wedge it in my classroom. And then the other thing is, like, it's not quite ready for prime time with students yet, and that's okay. schools should really understand like how the educators can use it, how the administrators can use it to make their job, as I said before, more effective and more efficient. And then I think other solutions are going to begin to emerge. I think it is part of a solution that is a combination of implementation of high quality instructional materials with tier one instructional practices. It's a creating the systems and structures for multi-tiered systems of support so that learners that can't access those tier one instructional strategies have opportunities to learn at a high level anyway. I think 3, it's going to take like innovative staffing models, including like what you guys are doing at Full Mind. So it's both real time and virtual ways to make sure that every student, or as many students as possible, have a great teacher in front of them. And then I do think that it is going to be technology, whether it's AI or other things, that are going to create efficiencies that not only make teaching more effective, but allow teachers and administrators to answer the question of what am I going to do with all my recaptured time? Some of that time will be like restorative, but some of that time will be like going back to where we started, Hayley, like how do you build relationships, which is what like human beings do best.
Oh, right there. Yes, that's it. At the conversation last night, Sia, who I mean literally works for ChatGPT, right? She's the education go-to-market, brilliant individual. Her anecdote that she shared was about a teacher who like could close her laptop because she used the tool to help her finish her lesson plans when the kid had a crisis. She's like, I needed to be like, it was more important for me to be there for that student and like hear why they were having friendship woes and help them navigate it than, you know, adding one final detail that AI could help me do, which I think is very valid.
Yeah, absolutely.
Rob, I feel like we covered a lot on this conversation, but not nearly enough. And yet here we are at my final question. What advice would you give a school leader who's starting their career today? I want to specifically tweak the question though, and make it so that they can sustain this work.
Yeah. I mean, my number one piece of advice that I give people right before they become a school leader is become a great teacher first. I think lots of people rush to school leadership after 2, 3, 4 years in the classroom. And there are a few exceptional people that can become great after 4 years, but it's 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 years that it really takes to become exceptional at teaching. And you learn so much, not just about how do you implement world-class instruction, but just about people. The second piece of advice that I would give, and I hit on this, is who's your team? Who are the people that you're enlisting around you? Be super intentional around that. A person that I used to principal with, that was in our network, used to say, power is the only thing that multiplies when it divides. And figure out who are those people that you can divide power with, because that's going to have this multiplicative effect on your school and support your own ability to sustain yourself. And then the last piece of advice that I would say is like go see excellence and seek that out. Who are the people that are doing things that are slightly different than you are, but better? And who are people that are doing things that are wildly different from you, but producing great outcomes for kids? Those for me, sustained me because they were sources of inspiration for what's possible and gave me ideas of like, how do we take this school that I'm leading to the next level?
You just wrote a playbook. That was great. No, that was really wonderful. I appreciate the specificity of your replies there, and also the actionable insight that you just shared for someone who may be listening to this, who's about to embark on a leadership position. Rob, I'm so glad we slotted up next to each other at ASU GSV. It is so wonderful to know you and to hear your insights. Thank you for coming on the podcast today.
Yeah, absolutely. And just like, thank you for everything that you're doing. I feel like we need as many organizations as possible that are focused on this Like, how do we make outcomes better for both kids and the adults that are working with them?
Could not agree more. And thank you to everybody who tuned in today.
Thanks for listening to the Learning Can't Wait podcast. If you like what you heard, please rate, review, and share this episode. Be the first to know when we have a new episode by subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or have a suggestion for an episode, email us at podcast@fullmindlearning.com.